Tom again with D&B Tech. So I've been harping on this whole my dial, do you need a front dial question for a while. I think this is my last video. I sure hope it is. But this video is about why it's not as big of a deal for the A7C versus the A6000 series cameras. Let's go. Okay, so A7C versus A6000 series cameras, there's a lot of differences. I'm kind of holding my A6000 here because I'm filming with my A6400, but I'm using this as a proxy for my A6000 series camera that has my dial capability. So, unlike the A7C, the 6000 series cameras only have one control dial on top like this, and the A7C has another one dedicated to exposure comp. Now, as I said in my last video, a lot of people, perhaps the vast majority of sort of advanced amateurs and even professionals, shoot in aperture priority. Some shoot in shutter priority, I guess. Not as many shoot manual, full manual. And I mean full manual because there's, you can have, there's manual mode where you're still using auto ISO, which is somewhat of an automatic mode. The camera is controlling the ISO based upon some set point. It has to have some way of understanding too bright or too dim. And so if you're using auto ISO in manual mode, you're still using a automatic function of the camera. In that case, in that one specific case, even if you're in manual mode, exposure comp is still valuable to you because as you turn exposure comp, it moves that set point. That's what exposure comp basically does, regardless of what mode you're in, is it moves the auto exposure set point for the auto exposure algorithm. So as you move that exposure comp setting, it moves the set point up and down. So even in manual mode, exposure comp is somewhat useful. The reason I say it's useless is because I'm in manual mode, I'm in full manual, and I set the ISO to what I want, but I do use auto ISO sometimes as well too, so I stand corrected. But anyway, one of the people that viewed my video sent me a link for the A7C manual. So even though I don't have an A7C, I took a look at the manual, and the one thing which is different about the A7C, apparently different versus these A6000 series cameras, is this button right here, which is the movie button on 6000 series cameras. On A7C, the button is up here somewhere, right? The movie button. On 6000 series cameras, the movie button cannot be customized. You can turn it off and say, no, I don't want to use it. I want you to hit the shutter to actuate movie. But you cannot assign another function to that button right there. Can't do it. Not possible. Well, on the A7C it is, according to the manual that I've seen and according to some people who have written into the comments. So that's great because, as you know, there's a dearth of custom buttons on the A7C. Well, that's one more now. So if you can take that custom button on the A7C and assign it, then you can do the sorts of customizations I talked about in my other video for manual mode. So you can basically make that dial, the one dial in the back on the A7C, switchable between aperture and shutter speed. And since there's a dedicated exposure compensation dial already, you basically have the best of all worlds. Yes, I know you got to figure out what to do about ISO. Okay, and you got that button back there, it says ISO on it, you hit it. That's okay. The hard part about this dial is that if I want to try to turn it, I have to apply some force. If I apply too much force, I actuate one of the D-pad buttons and I change a setting that I don't want to change. That's the problem. But if I'm just using it as a D-pad, 4 buttons, it works fine. So ISO back here, exposure comp with a dedicated dial of the A7C, repurpose the movie button for my dial to switch between aperture and shutter speed. As long as you're okay with using the shutter button and switching into movie mode before you take a movie, that should give you everything you want. You know, if you're an aperture priority shooter, shutter priority shooter, then the A7C, I think, will work great for you because it has a dedicated exposure comp dial, and you can repurpose that movie button if you want to. Now, if you're a video person, you might not want to do that. But then if you're a video person who doesn't shoot in aperture priority or shutter priority, then I think that's a little on the fringe. So maybe the camera won't work for you. Maybe you should go for A7S3 or something like that. But if you know what you do, that's great. If you're not into full manual or having an ultimate control, then I believe the A7C is probably a pretty darn good camera for you. If you are, then there are other options from other manufacturers or from Sony, as long as you're willing to pay the price. So I hope you like this video. If you do, please come back and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks.